show that you're putting in a good faith effort rather than just saying, yeah, we know we have problems. We don't care.
Are there any legal requirements around website accessibility?
There are. All around the world, there are laws that require that. I'm here in the United States. There are two major laws that come into play. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, that impacts any government organization or anyone that receives federal funding. So sometimes nonprofits that get federal grants, that would also apply to them. For for-profit businesses or most brands where accessibility really comes in the United States is under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That requires that all places of public accommodation, and the Justice Department came out with a strong statement that says, yes, websites are places of public accommodation, must be accessible to people with disabilities. In the United States, we have a lot of lawsuits, and most of those are happening because of the Americans with Disabilities Act and a website not being compliant. And so someone with disabilities will typically request a fix. And if it doesn't happen, their next recourse is to sue, because that's the way the Americans with Disabilities Act was set up. Outside of the United States, one of the strongest laws is in Ontario, Canada. So they actually require biannually, every other year, any organization with more than 25 employees actually has to file a report on the accessibility status of their website with the provincial government. Any organization with more than 50 employees has to meet certain web content accessibility guideline criteria for 2.1 AA. So in the EU, there are also laws, and it's getting more strict. The EU has passed requirements that different countries within the EU need to pass legislation at the country level on this. So I'd expect to see in the next 1 or 2 years more coming out in the EU.
Okay. How prevalent do you think lawsuits are for accessibility issues?
So I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but last year in the United States, it was a little bit over 4,000 lawsuits that we're aware of. Now, what happens is typically a company will get a demand letter first that says, hey, if you don't do XYZ, we're going to sue you. So the actual lawsuit, the filing in courts, is what happens before that. So obviously you can imagine there's a large number of demand letters coming out that's much higher than the 4,000. It is a number that has been increasing by large amounts in the past 4 years. Really, we've been seeing big upticks, especially during and post-COVID. It's not a massive number when you think about the number of companies in the United States, but it's also not insignificant. And it is something that they're showing growth in that area, particularly for any sort of businesses that are in California or New York. That's where most of the lawsuits are happening. And what businesses have to be aware of is very much like sales tax. You don't necessarily have to have a location in California to get sued in California about the accessibility of your website. If you have customers in California, if you ship to California, if you have to have one employee in California, then you might be considered to have nexus in that state, and that could happen. Okay,
that makes sense. Okay, all right. I'm sure our listeners are getting a little freaked out right now, but it's okay. We'll dive into some steps you can take. But one more question about the why before we get into the how. Now, social responsibility, not getting sued, those are great reasons to add accessibility to your online presence. But can increased accessibility also help reach more customers and help businesses make more money?
Definitely. So there have been some studies that show that websites that are more accessible might have a lower bounce rate or higher conversion rates. There is a huge amount of overlap between accessibility and search engine optimization. So a lot of brands, search engine optimization, that is how you get in front of people. That is how they find out about your company or your products or your services. And making your website more accessible will lead to having better text on your links, which Google looks at when it's trying to understand where you're linking to. Better, more semantic use of headings so that they're used in the right order, having alternative text on images, all of these things that are really great for a screen reader. Well, they're really great for Google, because if you think about it, Google is probably one of the most frequent blind users of your website. So if a screen reader, Google, can access the content, move through the website, then that's going to help you in search engines. And then, yeah, it's just in general, a lot of accessibility is kind of overlapped with usability and user experience or UX design can come in a lot with that. And so just in general, a more accessible website is more likely to work for all users, even people who are typically abled.
Earlier, you talked about the keyboard test and just saying that if you think you need accessibility, you probably do. Is there anything else a business owner can first identify whether their website is lacking? And two, what can they do to get started in making the necessary changes?
So automated tools are useful because they can just give you a quick snapshot of what are some maybe low-hanging fruit. And then some of them, like ours, for example, we've worked really hard to create documentation that explains why is this being flagged? What should you do? And there's other tools that do this as well. So they could also be a learning resource, which is really helpful to help you figure out what the problems were and know how to actually resolve them. If you are really looking to improve your website, another great thing is to bring in a person with disabilities to test the website. So in the disability community, we like to say nothing for us without us. And the best way to really know if a website is usable is to have a blind person who uses a screen reader go through some user journeys on your website and observe them and get feedback from them about where they're getting hung up. You can reach out to your customer base. People are sometimes surprised. I know I talked to someone once where he was talking about how he's colorblind. And that's very common actually among men. And so he has trouble with charts sometimes or graphs. If certain colors, like he can't tell the difference between this bar and that bar on the bar chart, right? And so just asking in your audience or with your employees or your shareholders or volunteers, if you're a nonprofit, you may have people that already face challenges on the web who might be willing to provide you some feedback. Otherwise, there are companies like mine or nonprofit organizations that you can go to hire people with disabilities to test the website and do like a one-time or a regular engagement. And then once you've started to generate this list of issues or problems that you want to address, then what you want to do is sort of map out what the timeline and the plan for making those fixes are. Sometimes they're content related fixes. If you're using a typical content management system, whether it's WordPress or Drupal, Joomla, Squarespace, Shopify, any of those, a lot of problems can come in just on how your marketing team is entering content on the website. And so it might just be a matter of bringing someone in to train your team. And then a lot of those problems can be resolved by your team. And you just figure out, how many pages can we fix in a week or a month or whatever that might be. And then, working through those problems and fixing them over time. I don't think accessibility remediation is ever overnight. What's really important, and this is something that lawyers have told me can be very helpful if someone does get a complaint or get sued, is being able to document when you started the process of identifying the problems, what problems were identified, and then what plan you put in place to fix them, and then show progress towards accessibility is really helpful on that front to show that you're putting in a good faith effort rather than just saying, yeah, we know we have problems, we don't care. And then some problems do require a developer. And so if you don't have an in-house developer, that's where you would want to talk to. If you have an agency you're working with or a freelance developer you're working with, ask them questions about their accessibility experience. But I wouldn't just say, do you know how to make things accessible? Because we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of developers where they say that, but they don't actually know. There are some certifications out there that come from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And the one that is a really great indicator is the Website Accessibility Specialist or WAS certification. There's a trusted tester that's actually a federal government certification under Section 508. So having those are a good sign that someone knows what they're talking about. Beyond that, I would ask them for other websites that they've either built or that they have worked on to fix accessibility problems. And then what you can do is you can go to the Wave website from WebAIM and you can put in the URL of that and it will run an automated scan on that website. And then you can, that will tell you if it has errors a lot of errors and a lot of color contrast issues, then you can go back to them and be like, wait, do you actually know about this, right? And I think asking them questions about their approach to accessibility, you can sort of start to suss out like how thorough they are. Are they talking about accessibility as part of design? So when we design a new landing page, we should be talking about it before we even start building. You know, those sorts of things. That's somebody who's more likely to fully get it and understand that it's not just something that you want to slap on at the end.